All right, let's go straight into the issue today, the RBA rate rise, seventh such consecutive rate rise now, the highest cash rate since 2013. Joining me now, News Corp business commentator, economist himself, Terry McCrann. Well, there's not much joy in the news today, Terry. Not only that, of course, but in the notes, the RBA saying with inflation still a worry, they're likely going to keep needing to lift rates now and into the future.
Well, exactly, Peter. The question is not whether rates are going to go up today or indeed next month in December or indeed next year. The question, as always, is how much they go up by and how quickly they go up. I think the Reserve Bank should have done 50 points today because it said in the statement today that inflation is actually going to be higher, it's going to be worse than it expected when it raised rates by 25 points a month ago at the beginning of October, and by whipping out on rate rises, bigger rate rises up front, the likelihood is that rates are going to go higher and have to stay higher longer than would necessarily be the case if the Reserve Bank really aggressively tackled the inflation problem head on and up front. We've learnt that from decades that if you don't get on top of inflation early, it gets worse, and the pain gets much greater in terms of the impact on borrowers.
Yeah, I just got to ask you that. However, given the seventh rate rise today, given a budget last week, which we know from Newspoll, showed 55% of us say it doesn't do enough, not only that, it'll take us backwards. I mean, how much more can people cope with?
Well, exactly, Peter. This is not a good situation to be in, obviously, because it's not only interest rates and the impact it has on your mortgage, it's what's happening across the spectrum by deliberate policy decisions from the government. And the most obvious is what's happening with energy costs. I mean, we did have a promise, I think, before the election in May, that the government was going to cut the price of electricity by $275 over the next 3 years. You know, we can laugh sardonically about that because clearly, and it's now saying that energy costs are going to go up by 50% next year, by this time next year. So it's the pain is across the board. And yes, Peter, there's no joy for people out there. But the worst thing we can do is to back off fighting inflation, because we know that is so destructive and so painful in the long run if you allow inflation to really get entrenched.
Well, I know, like you, we both live in Victoria. We've got a Victorian election kicking off today, the poll on the 26th of November. We've got this circus yesterday we saw with an update to the mid-year financial reports for the books in Victoria. Red ink everywhere, the highest debt in the land in state and territory terms. We had $15 million announced by the Premier to sponsor with a tourism logo on the kit for Netball Australia players. We've got ambulances that don't turn up in time. We've got a death toll at the moment of 33 people this year alone in relation to ambulances. Surely that's where the money should have gone, Terry McCrann.
Well, absolutely, Peter. I mean, and let's take a step back and realise that these forecasts are the most optimistic ones that the government can come out with. This is the government forecasting, not Treasury, not independent experts. Not that I have all that much faith in independent experts, but this is the government putting out what is essentially a political forecast running into election. So it's painting it in the brightest possible colours. And yet, as you say, the outlook is so negative in terms of the debt and in terms of the failure to get the services that we need from the billions of dollars that we're spending.
What about this gas warning out today? The South Australian Labor government, I'll underscore that point's really taken aim at Daniel Andrews. They say for restricting gas developments in the midst of soaring power prices. Look, I feel like you and I have been talking about these issues, these energy issues, for about a decade. This has been a problem on both sides of the South Australian-Victorian border. But of course, we're reaping what we sow now, aren't we?
Well, exactly, Peter. I mean, if you refuse to look for gas, you will not have the gas, and you refuse to allow others to look for gas, it means that you won't actually have the product. Forget about high prices for gas. You won't even have the gas in the first place. And we in Victoria are expecting the rest of Australia to provide us with gas, New South Wales and Queensland and South Australia, but we're not prepared to take the decisions ourselves. And it's an extraordinary abrogation of the most fundamental duty that a government has to deliver the very basic energy resources that people need, gas and electricity.
I tell you, we're glad to have you back from your leave break in the middle of the Victorian election campaign, if not everything else. Terry McCrann, thank you as always.